In part one, we focused on more of the 1790s, when the white muslin dress was the main focus and Jane Austen first started writing her novel that would later be called Pride and Prejudice. Now we fast forward to when it was published in 1813. The fall season gave way to winter, and the beautiful fall colors went away as the Bingleys and Mr. Darcy did in Pride and Prejudice. The news also was spread that a Mr. Wickham was pursuing a Mrs. King, that frail thing. All of this contributed to the Bennets feeling quite melancholy, except for Mr. Bennet and Lizzie, who realizes that she didn't quite care for Wickham as much as she thought she did. But once her dear Jane leaves for London, even Lizzie lets the winter melancholy get to her, and she cannot wait to visit her friend Charlotte come spring. Winter in Jane Austen's Britain. What does one do outside in the winter during the 1810s? What would the Bennet sisters have done outside, especially while being children or teens? First, we must look at what they would have worn outside. They would not have had snow pants or snow boots or overalls like we do today, but they would have still had some sort of gloves, hat, scarves. They also, in addition to these, would have had a fur muff, some apparently large but more likely normal sized. They also would have worn a pelisse or pelisse, depending on how you pronounce this. These were either shorter or all the way to floor length. They would have been lined with fur or silk or made entirely of wool, depending on the type of season that you wanted to wear these. Using this as my inspiration, I used an old sheet and turned it into my own pelisse or pelisse. I lined it on the top with satin, but kept it just one layer for the trailing gown part of the back. I enjoyed wearing this, especially the straw hat I made using a Dollar Tree hat that I cut in half and then added the extra material to make the back, but I will probably shorten this so that it makes it more practical to walk in. Over the top of the pelisse, or in place of, they would wear capes, sometimes several capes of different lengths. A lot of them were made red as influenced by the military or their political views. Sometimes it can be hard for us to walk in the snow. I bet it was much harder for the Regency's ladies to do so. Here is a picture of them trying to walk on the road in mud and muck, where they would use a special kind of contraption called a patten, which was usually out of iron or metal of some sort, sometimes wooden, that would raise them a couple inches above the ground. But they would be quite noisy and very cumbersome to still use. Switching abruptly to what would they have done outside if they could? I'm sure we wouldn't have seen Regency ladies sledding down the hill, but could they have done other things outside? They could have ice skated, perhaps, or a few other things if the weather was mild and not too muddy or too snowy, such as playing shuttlecock. But for the most part, Regency ladies tended to stay inside. Since Regency ladies tended to stay indoors more than outdoors during foul weather, how did they stay warm enough inside? Depending upon which class you were in, would also depend on how many fireplaces you would have in your home, with the lowest being perhaps just in the kitchen, to the highest being in perhaps every room of the house. A servant would often tend to all these, keeping them roaring, but remember, windows were drafty. It was said that a woman could stand at the window and get a freeze, and just a few feet away be by the fireplace and become too hot. Because the thin cotton dresses were no match for the damp, cold winters of the UK, a lady could wear several petticoats, often of flannel, plus shawls and perhaps waistcoats and sleeveless spencers, to be sure that they would not catch the dreaded muslin disease, blamed on not dressing in enough layers and wearing only a thin cotton dress. Now we must ask, what does one do inside during a British Regency winter? Would they be reading a book like today? Reading was done as much as lighting would allow, and of course your work, or needlework, aka embroidery, was always done no matter what season you were in. My oldest daughter has really gotten into embroidery from this study. She loves it, and I am just amazed at the things that she just comes up with on her own. Like this picture she made for her sister that she copied from her sister's book. Other quote unquote employments, as they were called, like drawing, were also common. Playing piano, like Mary did in Pride and Prejudice, though apparently she played very ill. My daughters have just started to learn how to play piano, thanks to very sweet, generous friends who gave us this digital piano. Children would still be children and play with toys, like tin soldiers for the boys or paper mache dolls for the girls. Getting to visit others or having visitors was often hindered during foul weather, so one would have to converse more with the family over tea time while sharing any news or letters with each other that a family member would receive.
How much honey did you put in there?
Morning and afternoon dress usually included long sleeves and something to cover the neck and chest area, such as a fichu or a chemisette. Caps, such as the one that I'm wearing in this video, were also very popular. They were worn by those who were married or matronly, but they could also have been worn by younger ladies as well. They helped to keep the head warm, and they also helped to make sure that your hair didn't have to be fully done up, something that Jane Austen herself really liked. She prided herself in making the most beautiful caps and not having to do much with her hair, since her hair was naturally curly. During this time period, hair was parted in the middle, with the front to behind the ears cut shorter and then curled. Grecian statues were still influencing this time period in both gown and hair, ribbons, ringlets galore. Short hair could be seen, though mostly because one had been sick, not to set a trend. While poor Lily tries to comb her hair, we're going to skip on to another thing that happened during the winter, such as a ball or a party, such as in the novel Emma at Christmas time. Here, Addie is wearing her Spencer jacket, her cap, to go along with her matching gown. These gowns could be short sleeved and did not need to cover as much as the neck and the chest. This dress I made out of taffeta that I had bought years ago when Hancock Fabrics went out of business. I was saving it just for the right time, and this was perfect. She wore this dress for our candlelight service. Now presenting a Miss Bennet, a Miss Bennet, a Miss Bennet, a Miss Bennet, and a Miss Bennet. Thank you. And of course, one cannot forget a Mrs. Bennet. Mr. Bennet stayed home as account of a cold. Besides the usual dancing, music, and reading, there was usually several card games going on, such as the game Whist, mentioned several times in Jane Austen's novels. We had to give this game a go. We used the partnership version. It was actually quite fun and easy to do. However, we also found that playing cards with gloves on was very difficult. We even joked we would try to play Dutch Blitz, if you've ever played that game, with gloves on, just to see how incredibly impossible and frustrating that would have been. We didn't try it. The dresses for these were also made out of sheets or leftover muslin fabric that we had had from the previous part 1. Now, we have found in our studies that Jane Austen often had someone in her novels who was a gossip or who had no filter. And these card playing times or other times to get together were no exceptions for these kind of personalities and these traits to come out in full force. It seemed as if everyone was on display for everyone to judge. However, we have to admit that being able to see people in person and talk to people in person is an art that we should get back. All in all, the Bennet sisters survived the winter time as best as they could. But just like us, they looked forward to the beautiful days of spring, where we all will see you in our finale of our Bennet Sisters project.